Good morning and cheers to the hardest working committee, the Assembly Committee on Government Affairs. Will the Secretary please take the roll?
Assemblyman Carter.
Present.
Assemblyman DeLong.
Present.
Assemblyman De Silva.
Here.
Assemblywoman Duran. Assemblywoman Gonzalez. Assemblyman Gurr. Assemblyman Hibbets. Assemblyman Koenig. Assemblyman MacArthur. Assemblyman Nguyen. Assemblywoman Taylor. Assemblywoman Thomas. Chair Torres.
Thank you, and welcome to the committee here, the audience in Las Vegas. It looks like a packed room, and those joining us here in Carson City in a similarly packed room. And anyone watching online, I know we have a lot of followers, so cheers to you. I want to give a special appreciation to our committee manager, Ms. Judy Bishop, who is celebrating April Fool's a little early, so we all walked in with a beer on our desk, but actually, no, it's a Jell-O. So if you see your committee enjoying a beer, it really is only a Jell-O, so thank you, Ms. Bishop. It was a great way to start our day. Cheers, Vice Chair.
Cheers. Cheers.
All right, without further ado, just a couple housekeeping items. Please remember to silence your electronic devices. If you wish to testify, please sign in at the table by the door and provide a business card to the committee secretary. If you've joined us online, please mute your microphone when you are not speaking. When testifying, please turn on the microphone and clearly state your name and spell your name and state your affiliation, if any, for the record. Then turn the microphone off each time you are done speaking. Handouts should have already been provided to the committee staff. We expect courtesy and respect in our interactions during the meeting, even if we do not disagree with one another. I know that this is a really contentious piece of legislation we're going to discuss today. Committee members will be using their laptops to view handouts and other documents. Please do not view this as a sign of disrespect or inattention. Public comment will be taken at the end of the meeting. Each person will be limited to 2 minutes. In addition, the public may submit written testimony to the committee up to 24 hours after the hearing. All right, so we are going to go ahead and open the hearing on AB 361. Assemblyman, when you're ready.
Good morning, Chairwoman Torres and committee. I think it's like sad that you guys got Jell-O, but we didn't. I'm just saying. For the record, I am Assemblywoman Danielle Monroe Moreno. I represent Assembly District 1, which is in Las Vegas. I'm here today to present Assembly Bill 361, which seeks to streamline the state's existing federal grant acceptance and work program approval process. Just to give you a little background on it, we're going to provide the history of federal grants in Nevada, and then we'll discuss the need for this bill. Nevada has long struggled to access and administer federal grant funding on a level competitive with other states. In fact, Nevada ranks 45th nationally in federal grant funding per capita, and much worse in key categories like education and health. This shortfall causes the state, along with local governments, public agencies, and nonprofits, to be underfunded, and it inflates pressure on the state and local tax and fees. As a result, every Nevadans are shortchanged hundreds of millions of dollars in federal grants that could be invested in building stronger, more inclusive communities and a more resilient economy. To put it bluntly, Nevadans can't afford to lose out on these resources, and it's not fair to them at all. This is my third session working on legislation that aims to improve Nevada's federal grants performance. In 2019, we created a pilot program to provide $1 million in matching funds to help agencies win more federal grants. In the 2021 session, we established the new Governor's Office of Federal Assistance, called for the creation and implementation of a statewide plan, enabled a grants management system, expanded participation in the public-private Nevada Advisory Council on federal assistance, and made our pilot match program from 2019 permanent in 2021. I'm proud that these bills earned support from a broad coalition of stakeholders and were passed on a bipartisan basis. But we have much more work to do. Throughout the pandemic, and now as we continue to spend down American Rescue Plan funds, it is plain to see that we need a well-organized plan along with improved processes to get federal money flowing quickly and efficiently. That's where we come to Assembly Bill 361. Existing law requires state agencies to have approval from the Governor Finance Office and IFC to accept a new grant and revise their work program to expend new grant funds. This process can take 3 to 6 months, during which a state agency cannot begin the implementation of the grant or expend the funds. AB 361 proposes allowing state agencies to seek GFO and IFC approval or denial sooner so that they can get to work shortly after being awarded a federal grant, instead of waiting 3 to 6 months. My co-sponsor on this bill, Mr. C.H. Miller, he and I are in the same morning committee, so only one of us could leave, so he apologizes for not being here. But we are sponsoring this bill to address this long-standing challenge that our state agencies face as they try to put federal money to work for Nevadans. Joining me here at the table today is Mr. Miles Dixon. He's CEO and founder of the nonprofit Grants Lab. And Miles will walk you through the mechanics of the bill. And Madam Chair, with your permission, I'm going to turn it all over to him and run back to my committee.
Feel free to work to your working committee on Ways and Means. Thank you so much. In all honesty, though, Chair, Assemblymember Monroe Moreno, we do appreciate all the work that you're doing in Ways and Means, and we recognize that you also are working hard. Mr. Dickinson, when you're ready.
Hi, good morning. My name is Miles Dixon. I'm the CEO of Nevada Grant Lab, and as the chairwoman said, we're a nonprofit based in Southern Nevada that supports fellow nonprofits, local governments, and public agencies as they pursue and administer federal funds to benefit Nevadans. It's a pleasure to be here before you. The chairwoman assured me it wasn't intentional that she was going to leave me alone, so I hope I do it justice. I know you have a few exhibits on Nellis having to do with this bill. We also have a presentation I'm going to walk through. I understand it's Friday morning at 8 a.m. and we're talking about financial policies and federal funds. So I'll try to keep it relatively brief, and I look forward to questions afterwards. In any event, I want to jump in and say first and foremost to the chairwoman, to Assemblyman Miller, and the many, many partners who have been working on this issue for now more than 12 years to try to move Nevada forward in getting its fair share of federal funds. We've made a lot of progress, but as the chairwoman pointed out, we still have a lot of work to do. AB 361 tries to deal with one of the more critical challenges we see in the flow of federal funds, and that's really post-application and really into the implementation period. I know you're going to be hearing a lot about federal funds this cycle and in the future, so I want to offer really quickly an overview, and this is in entirety, to the best of someone's ability to get on one slide, the process of federal funding. So you see a pre-award section, you see post-award. We often think about funds as both pre-award before it actually hits the state, post-award, what happens after we've signed a grant agreement. Up in the pre-award at the very top left, it's really where we start the work. We think about ideas and programs and partnerships that we would like to fund. Then we start writing applications for them, we match them to federal funding opportunities, and then ultimately, if we're fortunate, we can press submit on a high-quality competitive federal grant application. Right now in Nevada, that is in many ways where the work gets paused until we hear back from the federal agencies. Once we hear back, we move into implementation, and here in Nevada, that includes seeking state-level approvals from GFO and IFC. Once we get approval, we can start the work, and by start the work, it's really important to understand what we're really doing is starting. It's not actually doing. That's when we start hiring. It's when we start issuing sub-award agreements. It's when we start implementing the work, which still takes months in of itself. And so AB 361 really tries to deal with the center section. So the point after a state agency press submit on an application, but before they hear back on an award and ultimately before they can start the work. Under existing state law, well, let me first say, in any federal grant award, A federal grant award is effectively a contract. Anytime a state agency or a local government or a nonprofit takes in a federal grant award that it's applied for, it enters a grant agreement. That grant agreement, much like other contracts, define a period of performance. So date A through date B is the time in which you have to do the work that's going to be funded. So a federal grant agreement dictates the period of performance. Notably, grants are not unique to Nevada. So negotiating a start date isn't always a possibility. With federal programs that recur every year, or they may be large discretionary competitive programs, there is a definitive date set by the federal agencies that doesn't vary from state to state to state to state, that doesn't vary from applicant to applicant to applicant all across the country. There is a standard date set. Here in Nevada, state statute requires state agencies to have approval from both the governor's finance office on behalf of the governor and IFC on behalf of the legislature in order to both accept a federal grant award as well as implement it, i.e. revise the work program that allows them to expend the funds. So it's two pieces of approval required from both branches or two branches of the government here. So requesting and obtaining, let me quickly flag, there are exceptions in this process. There's an emergency statutory exception, i.e. an immediate exception that the governor can grant under emergency circumstances. There's a 15-day exception, an emergency exception. There's also a 45-day exception. So there are some exceptions built into this process as it is. I think what we would submit is that in a state that, as the chairwoman pointed out, is 45th in per capita funding, and in those poor categories like healthcare and education, we are 55th. That's 55th behind territories and district in federal investment, or 54th in education. So in a state that needs to crawl out of the absolute worst position in the country, treating every single grant, and there should be hundreds more, as an emergency doesn't really make sense, right? So this is about creating more predictability and more consistency so that folks understand how quickly they can start implementing. So requesting and obtaining state level approvals is time consuming. It's also sometimes really complicated. That process can take 3 to 6 months. And as a result of that, the delay from the period of performance that the federal agencies have set to when Nevada can start working is often 3 to 6 months. Notably, that doesn't change when the federal agencies expected us to start work. It doesn't change the date of the agreement. It simply changes when we show up to work. And that is a challenge for us. In fact, since 2011, when the Nevada Grants Office was created following the last recession and emergency spending from the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, numerous reports almost every single year coming from either the Grants Office itself, the Nevada Council on Grants, which is a public-private coalition including lawmakers that look at these issues, time and again, survey results come back and include the timing of our ability to start work is part of our challenge in getting and administering federal funds. So what we end up with is a delay of 3 to 6 months. You can see this on a visual here. This is a zoomed in section where we have the application is now submitted in the top left. And currently in the state, generally, when we submit an application as an agency, we press pause and we wait 3, 6, or at this point almost 9 months sometimes to hear back from a federal agency if our grant was awarded. If we're fortunate to have that grant awarded, then we start the state level approval process. Once we get through the state level approval process and we're finally at the point where we can begin work, you're looking at a range of anything from 190 to 440 days. I want to note, these are not the standard. This is the low end and the high end. The average probably sits somewhere in there. But from start to finish, submission of application or build of application and submit to work begins, we're looking at a really long timeline. What 361 is proposing is to create a provisional approval process that will allow right now the federal process that happens and then we start the state process to instead happen concurrently. So AB 361 doesn't adjust the oversight of the legislature in this process. It doesn't adjust GFO's oversight. It simply adjusts when this happens. So rather than happening after federal award notice, we bring it up to after the federal grant application. So the moment an agency press submit on their federal grant application, hopefully they take a day or two off and celebrate because it is really tough work and it's a big accomplishment in itself. And then they can start the state process so that ideally, if and when they get awarded the federal grant, they also have in hand the level of approval that they need from the state to start working sooner. So we see that happening by enabling IFC to grant state agencies a provisional approval to accept a grant and revise a work program. The provisional approval would become hard or final as long as that awarded amount does not exceed the greater of $75,000 or 10%. The context for $75,000 or 10% is you'll see that ratio or that formula show up in different places in fiscal policies for the state. So we wanted to strike a balance and recognize that, I'll speak for myself, not the chairwoman, I would love to see a much higher cap. I would love to see even more flexibility, but we also recognize that we need to strike a balance here. And so we simply mimicked an existing rule of thumb for state financial policies. So what's that look like in effect? Here you see a modified flow chart. If you stack the state level approval process right below the federal approval process, rather than state agencies having to sit and wait for the federal government to come back to them and then start the state level, we simply allow, and I want to underscore allow, this is an optional step, this is not required. The existing process can continue just as it is for those that want to use that. But for those that want to take a fast lane, a fast lane to approval so that they can start working sooner, this is a way to do it by simply starting the state level request right after they complete the federal request, so that while they're waiting to hear back from the feds, they can get state level approvals. That can shorten our overall timeline by 70 to 155 days. If we think about that in the context of 365 days, being able to save 2 to 3 months is real. It's critically important too because most federal funds work on a reimbursement basis, meaning you don't get a check up front. You get paid for work you do. And so if we are not showing up to work until 2 or 3 or 6 months late, we simply can't bill the feds for that. Maybe more importantly, it means we're not delivering services for Nevadans. So when we're late to the job, under the current circumstance, we can't deliver services and we can't even use the funds that we are awarded. And that's part of what drives down Nevada to 54th and 55th in per capita federal investment. So what we're trying to do is allow the work to begin sooner. I want to zoom out one more time and say federal grants are really complicated. There's lots of partners involved, multiple agencies, multiple folks within an agency, and when you start thinking about money flowing down to local governments or nonprofits to do the service, the picture gets even more complicated. So there are investments and improvements needed at almost every one of these steps. Today we're talking about just the handful that are after you press submit to the federal grants or to the federal agency and before you have your state level approval, looking to condense that timeline while maintaining the same level of oversight. These sorts of improvements and adjustments are probably needed at almost every one of these steps. 361 is a step in the right direction, but it won't alone solve federal funds. We have a lot more work to do, as the chairwoman said. I think some of those things include more investments in all of the other different lines here, as well as more opportunities to streamline. So with that, let me close by saying I've had the opportunity to work on federal grants in the state for a long time. And I run an organization, I have the privilege of running an organization every day that works with grant writers in local governments, in nonprofits, and in state agencies. And time again, I meet folks who are incredibly capable and skilled and thoughtful and caring in their jobs, who genuinely want to move Nevada forward and see federal funds as a key opportunity to do that. Today, by and large, they lack the support and the systems they need to be effective at their jobs. I think that 361, along with the work that the chairwoman and others have done over the last several years and the work that needs to come in the next several years, can finally move us to a place where, as a state, both state agencies, local governments, nonprofits, and our teams at each level actually have more of a fighting chance to get Nevadans their fair share of federal funds. So with that, I will stop and see if I can take any questions.
Thank you, members. Any questions? All right, I have a number of questions. Oh, well, almost everybody. So who doesn't have a question would be easier question. I'll go ahead and start with Assemblyman DeLong. No, I don't have a question. Oh, okay. I thought that you had for sure raised your hand. I'll go ahead and begin with Assemblyman Taylor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And good morning, Mr. Dickinson. Thank you so much for bringing this. You really hit, in my opinion, you hit the nail on the head. The most tragic thing about this is that those are services that are not being delivered to the people in our state, especially as we think about some of the great work that some of our nonprofits are doing to those who are most vulnerable and who really need the help. So thank you for the work that you're already doing, and thank you to you and our colleagues for bringing this forward. Here's my question: how do you envision implementation looking? Let's say this bill passes and so on. We get through all the work we need to do. What does that look like? And then, if I may have a follow-up. Chair, thank you. Please go ahead.
Sure. Through you, Chairwoman, thank you for the question, Assemblywoman. Thanks for the kind words as well. I'll be honest, we've passed a lot of legislation in this building over the last 7 years, and we haven't seen everything that we've passed fully implemented in a way that we envisioned, right? So I think that kind of comes with the territory to some extent. In this specific case, what we'd really like to see is agencies have the discretion, again, discretion, to use a provisional approval process in the cases where they think it makes sense. I find working with grant writers, as well as program side, folks often have a really good sense of whether their grants are going to be competitive or not. When we think about federal funds, they exist on a continuum. You have relatively reliable, recurring, formula-based aid that folks generally have a sense of, I'm going to press submit, and odds are I'm going to get this application. At the other end of the spectrum, we have one-time, discretionary, highly competitive programs that only 5 entities in the country are going to get. I would expect that grant writers and their teams throughout the state will have the discretion, as well as the competency and skill to know, I'm not going to go through a provisional approval process for some extraordinarily unlikely grant that we decided to submit for. And instead, I'm going to use a provisional approval process where we think it genuinely lets us get to work sooner. So I think that the discretion it can provide is really important. The other thing I would flag is while this moves the timeline sooner, what it doesn't do, and I think that does need to get done at some point at an administrative level, is really thinking about how to make the work program request process easier for applicants. When we think about a federal grant, we're talking about hundreds of pages of detail. There is almost no thing unanswered in most winning federal grants. And so really thinking about as a state, and I think the same goes for local governments and philanthropy in my space, I think that finding opportunities to recognize state team members already put a tremendous amount of work and detail into their federal grant application, and using as much of that content as possible in a secondary request to the state, as opposed to requiring people to rewrite, use all new forms, change modules, et cetera, is a really key opportunity. This bill doesn't dictate how the governor's finance office uses work programs or the existing content that they ask for. I would offer, though, I think much like so many other lines in this, in that chart, we need to be looking at the administrative side of how to streamline and simplify these processes so that we are not discouraging and making it difficult for state agencies to apply for money, and instead we are encouraging and streamlining processes.
Thank you. I appreciate that. When you talked about a 100-page grant, I have a friend of mine who has a grant writing organization in a different state and has had it for 20 years. And she talks a lot about some of those grants and all the work. I mean, she's on shutdown. Don't call me during that time. But my follow-up, if I may, though, you mentioned something about a challenge that you see in place from the grant process. Do you see any other challenges in the implementation of this? Because it sounds like a no-brainer, quite frankly. If we can speed up the process and not lose the approvals, what other barriers might you see?
Miles Dixon from Nevada Grant Lab. I think specific to approvals, if I zoom out and you give me all morning, I'll tell you about a lot of challenges I see. But specific to the provisional approval process, I think what you end up with is a scenario where if we are really educating agencies of the purpose and the intent of this legislation, which won't do itself, by the way, we have to go and actually tell folks that we're modifying processes because we expect and want them to be more successful in federal grants. I think if we appropriately educate people and understand and help them understand it's discretionary, and if you go through a provisional approval process, in some cases, by design, it should help you get started much sooner. and help them really recognize that it doesn't mean you have to go through this every single time, and that you should use discretion in when you use it. I think that's a key part of it, so that we don't have folks wasting precious time going through a process that may not make sense for them. But I genuinely believe, based on my experience, lots of state team members, as well as their colleagues in local governments and nonprofits, have an understanding of the flexibility they need and when to use it.
Thank you, Mr. Dickinson. I appreciate that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Assemblyman Nguyen.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, Mr. Dixon. Thanks for really waking me up this morning, because nonprofit is definitely my passion, and this is a space I get to work at every day before I come to this body. And federal grants is actually my least favorite topics in terms of what I do on a daily basis. Nonprofits work with federal grant as well. And, writing it is like a doctoral thesis. You write it, you submit it, you forget it. And you may or may not get that doctoral degree. But when you do get it, it's cool, because that's amazing. You have this project that you can work with. And I know that even amendments within that same grant awards, it's also another hurdle, right? If you come back and you see things that you need to change within what you submit a year ago or months ago, and you need to change it, you had to go back for another process. I mean, people think amendment in this building is hard, but amendment for federal grant is a whole nother level. So can you explain in layman's term, in the bill you stated that you must go to seek approval where there's 10% or 75,000. Can you walk us through that a little bit better in terms of just everyday terminology? For example, if the proposal we asked for $1 million, and then we get back $1 million, 100,000 maybe, right? 1.1, or we get $1,076,000, right? Yeah. So in those both scenario, it's $24,000 different, if I did my math right. Either cases, you would go back and seek some guidance. So I'm just trying to think that we're setting ourselves up in a way where it's a little bit too cumbersome. Mm-hmm. So as we're trying to make it easier, it seems like we're going backwards. So if you can explain that, thank you.
Miles Dixon, Nevada Grant Lab, through you, Chairwoman, to the Assemblyman. First and foremost, I want to hire your grant writer who gets more money than they ask for, so please send him my way. I will tell you that you are absolutely right. We often see a federal agency come back with a different award than what you request. Usually it's lower, and in those lower rates, or those cases, what you end up with, and I think it's represented here on that kind of orange or rust color bar, is an agency will come back and say, congratulations, you've won the grant, but not in the amount you asked for. Rather than giving you $1 million, we're going to give you $900,000. And in that case, you have to renegotiate. And typically what that looks like is a modified budget. So it is your job. The agency says, we're going to give you $900,000. Give us a budget for what you're going to spend $900,000 on. And also, if you need to modify your work plan, different than your state work program, in a federal grant, your work plan, how many people you're going to serve, what's the timeline, et cetera. It's your job as an applicant to revise your budget and revise your work program, resubmit it. That process can be cumbersome and, to your point, sometimes a little frustrating. But in any event, it happens, and it happens regularly. What we're trying to do with 376 is recognize that that process happens, and we're allowing for whatever is the greater of 75, sorry, now I'm looking. You've got me on a Friday morning, 25,000 or 10%. And so in that case, 75. Gosh, it's been a week. 75,000 or 10%. In that case, it's whatever is the greater, right? So if it was $1 million award request and the agency comes back and says, congratulations, you've got 900,000, in that case, it would still satisfy the provisional approval because you're at 10%. If it is $899,999, you have to come back. I want to note in that case, it's essentially the same process that an agency would have gone through anyway, right? You still would have gotten an award, and right now, under current statute and practice, you wait until the award is finally settled, and then you start the state level approval process. So in this case, you start sooner, and hopefully, if you're lucky, the provisional approval, you get every dollar you asked for, maybe more, and the provisional approval process holds. If not, what you end up with is an opportunity to go through the same process you would have usually done, but in that case, you would already have most of the work program documents written. You'd already have most of the narrative, you'd already have most of the budget, and you would just need to update it with the same information you're sharing with the federal government. Having said all that, candidly, again, speaking from my perspective, I'd love to see a cap that's a lot higher. I think moving to a higher level of flexibility that doesn't discourage agencies or create unpredictability in bringing in federal funds is the absolute right thing to do. I think the cap should be a lot higher. We're trying to strike a balance with how things are currently done with where we think we need to go.
Right. Thank you for the answer. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Assemblyman Hibbets.
Thank you, Chair. So boiling this all down to what it really means, if I'm not mistaken, is this is to make government more efficient and leaner. Is that correct?
Through you, Chairwoman, to the Assemblyman, it's certainly more efficient. I think leaner in the sense that you ideally are, I'm going to give you a complicated answer. Bear with me. Part of our challenge in Nevada is that we rely on local and state taxes to pay for things, right? And a big reason for that is because we don't get our fair share of federal funds. And so I believe it becomes leaner in the sense of your ability as a body and as a state, same goes for local governments, to better balance the cost, i.e. share it with taxpayers who have already paid into the system. So you end up with taxpayers who've paid into the system, all of us, all of our family, our neighbors, our constituents, that don't get their fair share of federal funds back. So in terms of like fairness to a taxpayer, more money, absolutely. Does that make sense?
You have restored my faith in the ability of the government to make a yes into a 7-sentence answer. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I don't think Mr. Dixon is known for his very concise, short answers. Ask with caution. Assemblyman Thomas.
Good morning, Chair, and thank you so much for the presentation. My question actually has to do a little bit with history of whether or not you looked at other states to see how they have implemented this concept, and could that be the reason why we're behind, and whether or not our state has a lot of pushback of making positive changes?
Through you, Chairwoman, with the caution of history question
No,
on a Friday morning.
Please share, and feel free to go direct your leads to the member, too.
Assemblywoman, thanks for the question. So the question about how do other states do this? When we look specifically at 361, what we're dealing with is the approval processes that an applicant entity uses to say, yes, we want these funds, yes, we agree with how they're going to be spent. Often those approvals are typically occurring pre-application. So the reality is right now, by the time an application or award gets to IFC, it's a contract. And you face a take it or leave it decision. The agreement of how money is going to be spent, the project proposed, the budget proposed, who's going to do the work, all of that happens pre-agreement. When it reaches this body, it's an agreement form. I think the challenge for Nevada that makes this really unique, right, is that you all are not here every 730 days. And so the ability to get pre-approval just isn't viable here with how we're set up. So often when we look in other scenarios, if I think about cities and counties, typically you see some level of pre-approval happening before. That is, we're going to come to our council, we're going to come to our commission, and I'm not necessarily talking about Nevada entities, I'm talking more broadly. You see approval for a grant happening before the application is submitted, not after. We're looking at after here, and I think that's part of the challenge.
Thank you. I believe I still have Assemblyman Gonzalez. Is there anybody else? And then Assemblyman De Silva. Go ahead, Assemblyman Gonzalez.
Thank you. Oh, good morning. Thank you for the presentation, and thank you so much for the time yesterday and asking all my questions. I just had a few logistical, I guess, questions. Good luck, Mr. Assemblyman. I was making sure I didn't say his first name. So I was curious, and I don't think I asked this yesterday. This is only for the state agency grant process. Okay, I see you shaking your head, yes. And then you touched a little bit on it about getting the information out about the change. So I was curious, who will be responsible for letting the state agencies know that this provisional process will be existing?
Yeah, Miles Dixon, Nevada Grant Lab. I would expect that would be the governor's finance office, which, as you know, produces the finance manual, as well as the governor's office of federal assistance. Those two offices play a key role in educating Nevada's stakeholders about grants.
Thank you so much. And then my last question is, why the option for this process? Why not just make it this process? And thank you.
Miles Dixon, Nevada Grant Lab. I think provisional approvals, as well as more broadly, more flexibility for state staff who know their job really well is a good thing. And so, one, I think you have grant writers and program staff who really will have a sense of, I don't think this process makes sense for this grant, not all grants are the same, and actually be able to say, okay, this is a recurring program, we think we're likely to get awarded, we want to use a provisional, as opposed to this is so unlikely, it doesn't make sense to do extra work until we know for certain it's going to work. And I think so much of this comes down to providing folks who do the work every day more flexibility to actually be successful in their jobs. And so we think a provisional approval process that does that and preserves the existing process for folks who like it as it is makes the most sense.
Thank you so much. That helps a lot. I am not a grant writer, so I appreciate all your responses and your detailed response as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Assemblyman De Silva.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you, Mr. Dixon, for the great presentation. I had a quick question. So the actual loss of time here is staggering. When you first went over this data with me yesterday, it was very concerning, to be honest with you. And also seeing how this is associated with Nevada losing out on millions of dollars that we could be implementing in our, in benefiting people here through services. So my question is this, if you do not finish a project on time, are there any fees or penalties or fines that are associated with timeliness?
Yeah, thank you, Assemblyman. Miles Dixon, Nevada Grant Lab. Typically, you don't see fees and fines. Those are more reserved for compliance issues in terms of fraud and those sorts of things. What you really end up with is the opportunity, say, that your agency wins a $10 million grant. If you don't do the work, you can't bill for it. So your $10 million award turns into $5 million that was actually spent. So it's not fines and fees, it's just the loss of the actual money. So we effectively return money to the federal government that we could be spending for Nevadans.
Thank you. And building off of that question, do we have any idea how much money it is that we're losing as a result of this? Or could you give me a ballpark or a couple examples, maybe?
Sure. Miles Dixon, Nevada Grant Lab. Thanks for the question, Chairwoman. When we look at different studies over time, there was one at UNLV in 2016 that said Nevada was losing more than $526 million per year in federal revenue, excluding Medicaid. When you look at the Gwynn Center's report in 2019, the difference for Nevada just to get to the national average would have been $276 million per year, and that's the national average. I'll tell you, I think it's higher than both of those because Nevada leads the country in need, and often federal funds are premised on need categories. So we are the anomaly as a state that leads the entire country in need categories for education and health, and we are 54th and 55th in getting the very money that is intended to reach it. We're the only state that has that distinction. So 250, 270 from the Gwynn Center, 526 million from the Lindsay. I would bet on a higher number. And I think it's gonna take years to get there. That's not what we're gonna get next year because of 361. But I think if we really get our act together as a state, we should be talking about in excess of $500 million a year or more in additional revenue.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I think that kind of helps us conceptualize to the impact of making sure that we are streamlining the grant process for state agencies and nonprofit organizations within our community and finding ways to support their work so that we can get more of those federal funds in our community. Because, I mean, every session, all of us are bringing legislation that has fiscal notes that requires us to have the funds available. And we quite simply, like, we all know that a lot of our legislation dies because we quite simply don't have the funds for it. So, you know, I hope that this legislation allows for us to bring more funds in here and for us to actually use the money that we are awarded, because it seems like that's a part of that barrier, right? If it takes several months for these organizations and agencies to process those funds and receive these funds and start their programs, we're really delaying the work that they could be having that could be positively impacting hardworking Nevada families. I don't believe that there's any other questions for the committee. Thank you so much for coming, and thank you for sharing your expertise with this committee. I know that this really is your world, and that's why we can get so much information. We can learn so much from you, so thank you.
Thanks, Chairman. Thank you, everyone.
At this time, I will invite anyone wishing to testify in support of AB 361 here in Carson City or in Las Vegas. Whoever gets to the table first. It looks like we'll go ahead and start in Las Vegas. They ran to the table. Please begin when you're
I had
ready.
to knock over a few people. Good morning, Chair Torres and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Eileen Pastor, representing the Regional Transportation Commission of Southern Nevada. The RTC of Southern Nevada is in support of AB 361 as it promotes greater flexibility by allowing agencies to have the pre-clearance needed when applying for federal grants, which definitely improves the efficiency and streamlines the grant process. Grants are essential in developing the local economies, and we need to ensure that Nevada is getting our fair share of federal dollars. Thank you to the bill sponsors for bringing this legislation forward, and we urge the committee's support.
Thank you. It doesn't look like there's anyone else in Las Vegas, so we'll come up here to Carson City. Whoever wants to begin.
Good morning, Chair Torres, Vice Chair Duran, and members of the committee. Joanna Jacob, Clark County Government Affairs Manager. This has been a really interesting discussion, and as local governments, we are often at the end of that process that Miles Dixon showed you today. When it comes, we've been supportive of all of Assemblywoman Monroe Moreno's efforts to grow and build capacity for us to accept federal awards, because as you noted, Chair, often the delay in being able to deploy those funds means service is delayed in our community, and that's really important to us as Clark County and our regional service provider for so many of these services funded with an offset our costs with federal funding. So we're very supportive of these efforts. We're working with Nevada Grant Lab also on our local processes to see if we can streamline our efforts as well. So very supportive, and we urge your support. Thank you very much.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Nicole Rourke, representing the city of Henderson. As a former grant writer myself in another career, I very much appreciate the work of Assemblywoman Monroe Moreno and Miles Dixon in moving the state forward on grants. On behalf of the city, we're here to support this. We actually hired our own grant coordinator in February of 2020. So think about that timing. It was literally a month before the pandemic. And so I'd like to think that we had foresight that way, but in reality, it was just a chance timing. But we were very fortunate to have someone in that role coordinating amongst our departments and coordinating federal funds. Any process that helps expedite work on our side and the state side actually brings in more dollars. And so we've seen that ourselves. And so we appreciate the efforts to bring this forward and bring more money to our state. Thank you.
Good morning, Chair Torres and members of the committee. Francisco Morales here representing the Latin Chamber of Commerce. The Latin Chamber is in full support of this bill. I know that we're talking about federal grants, state, lots of processes, but ultimately, a lot of this money ends up in our local communities. Whether it's a local small business, a startup entrepreneur, healthcare, education, all the gamuts of services that are important to our community. And we agree that anything that makes this process a little bit more streamlined, a little bit more predictable and faster is good for our overall state and overall for our local communities. And that's why the Latin Chamber is in full support of this bill. Thank you.
Good morning, Chair, members of the committee, Daniel Stewart. And although I technically represent Nevada Grants Lab, I'm testifying in my personal capacity. this morning, simply based upon my experience that I had the good fortune of working for two different governors twice in the executive branch, both Governor Sandoval and Governor Sisolak. What I can tell you is the frustration on the ability to acquire federal grants does not have any partisan lens to it. The frustration runs across the gamut. In some respects, it's nobody who understands how far it goes. In fact, Director Brown, formerly of GoEd, spent a good number of days and weeks trying to research how long Nevada has been had institutional barriers to federal grants, and he found it went back maybe even as far as the 50s on things that had been built into the system. The last thing I'd say is there's an additional problem when we talk about barriers to federal grants, and that's just that people look at how hard it is and they just don't apply. And that's one of the hardest things to quantify. We can talk about the lost funds, we can talk about the starting halfway, we can start about the time loss, but it's almost inquantifiable the number of people that simply look and say, this is just not worth my time and effort to apply. And we need to incentivize that process as much as possible. So I personally urge support of this bill, and I thank you very much for your time.
Is there anyone else wishing to testify in support here in Carson City? I don't see any in Vegas PPS. Is there anyone on the line wishing to testify in support of AB 361?
Callers, if you would like to testify in support of AB 361, please press star 9 to take your place in the queue. One moment, Chair.
Good morning, Chair and members. Good morning, Chair and members of the Hardworking Government Affairs Committee. For the record, this is Dylan Keith, DYLANKEITH, with the Vegas Chamber, and it was also my absolute pleasure to oversee the Southern Nevada Forum. We'd like to first thank the sponsor for bringing this bill forward, as well as Mr. Dixon, both for their yeoman's work to make sure that Nevada gets their fair share of dollars. We'd like to thank the sponsor for bringing this bill not only back from last session, where we brought the Nevada Grant Office into the governor's cabinet to make sure that we were more efficient and it was fully funded. We would like to thank the sponsor for bringing it back once again to make sure that the grants process is as streamlined and common sense as possible. This bill is doing a fantastic job to make sure that our most desperate needs in Nevada are able to be funded. And it is an absolute essential bill that we get passed this session. Thank you, Chair and members of the committee, so much for testifying, and thank you to the Chair and Mr. Dixon for bringing this common sense bipartisan legislation forward. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. And Mr. Keith, I think you made an error. I think you meant to say the hardest working committee on government affairs. I think Mr. Keith is gone, but the record will reflect. BPS, is there anyone else on the line?
Caller with the last 3 digits 743. You're unmuted on our end. Please go ahead.
Good morning to the hardest working committee on government affairs. For the record, my name is Leonardo Benavides, representing the city of North Las Vegas, testified here in support of AB 361. Similar to some of our colleagues, especially Henderson, we also have our own grant specialists as well. We appreciate Miles Dixon's work and the Grant Lab's work on streamlining that process and helping bring federal dollars to Nevada. Thank you.
Thank you. Next caller.
Caller with the last 3 digits 692. You're unmuted on our end. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. For the record, Kelly Crompton, representing the city of Las Vegas. We would also like to thank the bill sponsor and Mr. Dixon for bringing this bill forward through the Southern Nevada Forum process. Over the last couple of legislative sessions, we have built a strong grants process in the state of Nevada, and we continue to build upon the work that we have done over the last few sessions. The city of Las Vegas, in tandem, has been building our grants program up. When we're not in the legislative session, I oversee 2 grant administrators for the city of Las Vegas. We build processes to ensure that we are bringing Nevada's fair share of grants dollars back to our state. We look forward to working with the bill sponsor and Mr. Dixon and the Nevada Grants Lab to continue to work together to make sure that these important dollars are coming back to the state. And we thank you so much for your time and support of this important bill.
Thank you. Next caller. And just a reminder to
Chair,
anybody
there are
else
no more
calling in.
callers.
Oh, thank you. Go ahead.
Chair, there are no more callers choosing to testify at this time.
Thank you. Is there anyone wishing to testify in opposition to AB 361? I don't see any here in Las Vegas or in Carson City. BPS, is there anyone on the line wishing to testify in opposition to AB 361?
Chair, there are no callers choosing to testify in opposition at this time.
Is there anyone wishing to testify neutral to AB 361? I don't see any in Vegas or any in Carson City. BPS, is there anyone on the line wishing to testify neutral to AB 361?
Chair, there are no callers on the line to testify neutral at this time.
All right. At this time, I'll invite the bill sponsor for any closing remarks. All right. No closing remarks. At this time, we'll go ahead and close the hearing on AB 361. All right, so we will go ahead and move into public comment first before I forget. Is there anyone wishing to testify in public comment? I don't see any here in Carson City. Oh, thank you. And I will go at this time, I'll also close the hearing on AB 361. I don't see anyone wishing to testify in public comment here in Vegas or in Carson City. BPS, is there anyone on the line wishing to testify in public comment?
Callers, if you would like to provide public comment, please press *9 at this time to take your place in the queue. Chair, there are no callers choosing to provide public comment at this time.
Thank you. And members, any remarks? Assemblyman MacArthur, you had a lot to say earlier this morning. No, he decided he used up all his words for the day. And I see as April Fool's, Assemblyman DeLong forgot his tie today. Are we doing all right there?
Barely keeping it together on the Friday of the 8th.
Our freshmen are having their first week. We're really keeping it together, but we're holding strong here in the hardest working committee on government affairs. So just a reminder to members, we will be meeting this upcoming Monday at 9 a.m. We'll be hearing AB 139. I do expect quite a bit of public comment on that one, or public testimony on that bill, just as a heads up. So I will see you all in this room on Monday. At this time, the meeting is adjourned. Happy April Fools.